Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Personal Transformation Podcast. My name is Dan Storey, and if you've listened to the podcast, you'll know that we're starting to see a theme now of that success comes as a result of doing uncommon things or common things, but in an uncommon way, and persisting and going through adversity and being able to stick with your goals regardless of the climate of what the weather throws at you, and whether it's rain, sleet, snow, darkness, light, sunshine, hail, any of those things. We've got to get after it. And one of the talents or one of the traits that we need to have is this idea of resilience and persistence. And so I'm joined today by Michael Ostrolenk, who's the director of resilience at I'm going to say a ranging, you guys seem to do a range of services in multiple spaces. And I'll let you pronounce the company name because my ancient Greek isn't what it is or what it was. But Michael, thanks for coming on the show and welcome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And it's a Paron Zoe. It's a precision-based medical clinic here in Austin, Texas, where I presently reside for a short period of time. I'm mostly nomadic.
Okay, so how does a precision medical clinic hire or appoint a director of resilience? Because I've never, I've looked on LinkedIn jobs, director of resilience is not a job title that I see come up very often. How did that arise for you?
Well, it's a really fun story. So Dr. Micah Hamilton, her and Dr. Dan Stickler, they're the ones who founded Paron Zoe. March of 2020, like COVID was kicking in. She reached out to me and she had seen maybe a talk I gave or something along those lines. And we have a mutual friend, Dr. Kirk Parsley, who's a retired Navy SEAL and also a medical doctor. He's an expert on sleep, someone you might want to have a conversation with. And she apparently checked in with him to see who I was. And he and I actually spoke together and have worked together over the years. Apparently he said really nice things about me. She reached out to me. We had a really good conversation. Next thing I know, I was hired to, first of all, as with that title. And I helped put together an online program on anti-fragility is what we ended up calling it, a title around anti-fragility using the Nassim Taleb's word, which I thought was really cool. And then they have an ecosystem. So I ended up teaching in their epigenetics academy. It had an academy which taught doctors and nurses epigenetics. I taught in that academy. I co-led in their mastermind group. I worked with their medical clinic within their medical clinic with their clients. So she just brought me in and spread me out throughout their whole system. And I learned so much because these are really brilliant practitioners, and they have a human optimization model that they operate from. So it's not like from illness to average, it's more like average to optimized. And the whole human system.
Yeah. Resilience is definitely one of those things that I think is, you need it at the bottom level, right? If you're in the wellness space, if you're unwell, you need resilience. You need to be able to cope with whatever life throws at you. And we went through as a family, we went through cancer with my stepdad, who battled it for like 8 years. And you never win that battle, you win moments. But eventually it comes to get you. But watching people go through that and having that resilience is important, right? We want that. But life isn't about playing down there. I don't think it is. It happens to us. We need to be able to bounce back to, like you say, average. But life really starts when we start to push beyond average. So how does resilience support? Why is resilience important at that point where we try and go beyond what we're normally capable of?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, if I could step back, because I run a men's group with J.C. Glick. He's a former Army Ranger. It's called Resilience Optimized. And we actually talk about Resilience 2.0. So I can contextualize your answer in saying, like, this is 1.0 and this is 2.0, at least the way we conceptualize it. And there's other different models and maps out there, which is cool. So and we talked about Goggins before we got on there. So we like to joke, and JC can do this because he's the former asymmetrical warfare guy, Army Ranger, 10 combat tours. So he can make these claims much more than I can. But he's like, the Jocko Willink wake up at 4:30 in the morning and start pushing a weight. Awesome. Get Goggins, run 100 miles before breakfast. Awesome. As human beings, especially men, it's a men's group, so that's kind of our framework. It's like, yeah, we need to be capable of doing really hard shit. Physically capable. Not only is it good for ourselves, for mentally and emotionally and physically, but in our lives, we live in a very VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. And you never know when your physical capacities could save the lives of your family. Like, can you carry your son or daughter out of the house because there's a fire? Are you able to defend your home against threat, like, physical force threats? Yeah. there's questions that I think men need to be answered. And part of that is like, the physical capability, the tactical training, all that stuff is great. We want to be strong and capable. Awesome. That and, because my whole life is yes and, yes and, yes and.
Yeah.
The second part of that is 2.0, which integrates the first part. Yeah, we want all that stuff. The second part, and I'll walk you through kind of three domains that we think about in terms of resilience. One is, how can you be more resilient in your own system? Not necessarily just physically, we've touched upon that, but like your ability to sit in your own uncomfortable feelings, thoughts, sensations. We men, human beings, have a tendency to like, we don't like what's going on inside ourselves, and we'll go to porn, we'll go to alcohol, we'll go to drugs, we'll work more, we work out more. We do these things to distract ourselves, and it makes sense. We all have our things that we do to distract ourselves. But the key to being really resilient and capable is really being able to sit in your own experience, like feel those feelings. Doesn't mean you have to act on the feelings, and that's part of this conversation. But allow the anger, allow the frustration, allow the sadness, guilt, shame, whatever the feelings are, to really emerge. Because if you don't, they're going to come out sideways, psychologically speaking, passive aggressive behavior or whatever else, or they could come out as physical ailments. So either psychological problems or physical problems. And there's enough mind-body medicine, research out there to confirm like that if you contract and you hold in certain emotions, it will have effects on your physiology as well as obviously your psychology. So part of Resilience 2.0 is teaching people how to sit in their own experience. And there's two other pieces, but let me just see if you have any questions on that.
This is something that comes up a lot in conversation with me, I've just started writing my new book, or at least drafting it, which is called Unstuck. And it's
Cool.
about this exact point, which is, I'm going to be frustrated at myself that I've got to this point and now I'm stuck. And people just get to this point where they kind of feel like they want to do stuff, and yet everything seems to be holding them back. And it creates this feeling of frustration and anger. And then we compare ourselves with everybody's highlight reel on social media, and we get angry at ourselves for not doing more. And like you say, then I try and escape, and I escape through some form of vice, whether that's harmful. The obvious ones are alcohol and drugs and like sex and those kind of things. But then, like you say, exercise is one that people go, okay, well, that's healthy. That's not, but it's a distraction, right? And, hands up, I'm a bodybuilder. I train every morning. I wake up at 5 a.m. I've kind of got the whole Jocko thing going on a little bit.
Cool.
I think I have the emotional elements in check to some extent, but not entirely. But it's this feeling, right? Is that, and I do it myself, and I'm in transition. We talked about this. I've just moved. I've kind of got a new, I'm leaning into this identity as an author now, and yet I'll sit here and I'll go to write, and I'll be like, I should do the kitchen, or I should go and brush my teeth again, or my coffee's empty, or something along those lines. And I know, because I've been around this for a little while, that that's just the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, the VUCA stuff. That's the emotions inside of me trying to get in the way of me dealing with whatever's in front of me. And so that seems to be a key part of resilience.
Would you mind if I speak to how it manifests or shows up for you?
Sure.
So I'm trained as a somatic therapist. I coach now. I've been in therapy coaching world for about 30 years now. Licensed as marriage and family therapist. I've been doing coaching since about 2000. Okay, cool. So I have background in training and all that kind of great stuff. Somatics and transpersonal psychology are my background. So I always think about the body, and I heard you say something is holding me back. So I picture like literally something holding you back. Yeah. So then I think, and like if I was working with you as a client, I'd be like, that's interesting. How does a frustration show up in you that you feel held back? Like, is there a breathing pattern? I'm sure there's a breathing pattern. Is there a posture? Is there muscle tone? Things happening in organ systems. Like, the way I work with someone would be to help them figure out the totality of their experience when it relates to when they're activated or triggered, or whatever word you want to use. Because once you know that, like the gestalt of the whole thing, like this is how I do it. And I want to step back and just say how is important. Why used to be important as the primary thing, like Freudian psychology. If you know why, it's your mother or your father, then you have the answer. Why is important? Like, I think it's useful to know like where it's generated from, this habit inside ourselves, whatever we do. But just because I know when I was 6 and then my mother said this to me and it sent me on this course doesn't change my behavior.
Yeah.
For me, it's the how you do it is the way in to change the structure of the how you do it into something else.
Yeah.
And it goes back to like, how do you sit with yourself and allow the feelings to come up? Well, there's a breathing pattern that would actually counters the contracted breathing pattern because I want to feel this shit that's inside of me. Like I can open up and breathe more fully. There's muscle contractions, like the fascia in the muscle. How do you release that? So like I can feel more fully and let it all out. And then we like, how do you manage that energetics? And then how do you express it to another human being if you so choose? 2 other conversations. But at first, like how do you open the system to allow all the stuff to come out so you can actually feel it?
Yeah, because it is a process. I know I'm doing it to myself, and yeah, I kind of get an idea in my head, but that's domino 1, right? And then I'm like react this way. And actually, I work one of my clients has got health anxiety, and it starts from just an idea, but then there's a whole, like you said, a somatic reaction that goes through the body and so many different things. And we don't need to do the why. It's just like, okay, well, let's play with what's happening and can we change that so you have a different experience. So okay, cool. Good. It's not just me that feels this way.
No, it's we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's resilience 2.0. But point number 1. You said there was a couple of other aspects.
Yeah, and that's just inside the human being, but that's just part of it. It's like allowing, and then you learn to manage it, and then you learn to express it. 2 other conversations. But and actually, the second part is really about managing and expressing it in relationships. So let's just stick with the heterosexual couple, the man and the woman, and men, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm guilty of this sometimes myself. So I drive generalizations, not true for every human being, but all men. But men seem to have a tendency to want to fix their partner when their partner's messy, and they're feminine, messy, energetics are moving all around, the emotions are moving all around. And it's not necessarily because they want their partner to be calm, cool, and collected, although that's part of it. It's because they feel uncomfortable in themselves with their partner feeling messy. So it's not necessarily, it's not all altruistic. I want to help you. It's like, I want to help myself because this is really uncomfortable for me. And it's a mixture of the 2. And as a family therapist, marriage and family therapist, and now a coach, what I will do is like what the man needs to do besides learn to manage, be aware of and manage his own states, is be open to a deep conversation, which can change every 5 minutes with his partner to find out what she needs from him now. Maybe she does need him to problem solve. Cool. All right. Men are usually really good at that, and he'll be really happy to help her solve her problem. Maybe she just needs someone, an ear. She just wants to share what's ever going on for her, and he just needs to be all open and listen, like not in the problem solving or whatever. Like there could be 30 or 40 other things that she might want from him, but that really requires a deep, open conversation in general. And then a willingness in the moment when it's hard to just manage yourself, be open, ask the questions, and show up as best as you can for how your partner needs you to show up. You're not going to be perfect. You have your own stuff going on sometimes, so it's a compromise back and forth. But that's interpersonal resilience, because you're strengthening the relationship between the 2. It's almost like you're creating a third entity, which is different than the 2 individual egos running around. And that creates resilience, which allows a relationship to last a lot longer. And another concept I like, and I borrowed this from a dev group friend of mine who says 2 is 1. It's not the husband and wife or the partners facing each other. It's like them 2 together, like facing the world. And that sounds easy. It sounds easy, and it sounds simple, I should say. It's not easy. Because once you're triggered, you're like, oh, and the other person is triggered, and you spin down on the shitter. It's like, how do you learn to heal yourselves, the wounding you might bring into the relationship? How do you learn to manage yourself in the moment? How do you evolve your own consciousness so you can do this and then face the challenge? It's a process, but that builds more resilience.
We can't be resilient on our own. Like we operate in a world where we have relationships, we have dependence, we have all these things. So I think as big as the challenges are, we do need to deal with them, and we need to face them, and we need to come to terms with them. But we also need to understand that other people have got their stuff going on, and sometimes those 2 people come head to head. So I'm interested because I'm not saying this has happened recently, but if you read between the lines, and it happened recently. But let's say, and we've just, our daughters just started going to kindergarten. There's a lot of stress and adaptation and movement, and it's a new environment, and we've kind of got challenges going on, all over the place. And so, me and my wife have a conversation, and it's like, this happened or this happened. So, I like the two as well. I like that idea, but oftentimes we're both kind of talking at each other, and it's definitely happened a couple times lately. How do you set that up? Because I'm assuming there's some kind of agreements or contract or verbal contract or something that you got to be able to say, hey, look, this is what we want to do. Can we jump in this together?
So you like, I'm like, wow, that's when you stole my words. The word I use is agreement. And when I work with couples, there's like 3 different pieces of it for the resilience of the relationship. One is the agreement. One is the inner work for the individual, learning to regulate and manage themselves and evolve and adapt and heal. And the other is co-regulation. So I'll start with the agreement. Agreement literally is, and most of the agreements we have in relationships are unconscious. Like there's a wink, wink, nod, nod. You bring in your culture, you bring in your religion, you bring in your nationality, you bring in your family of origin, all that stuff. And like something occurs, you see your face of your partner, and there's like a new rule is created. Oh, this is how we navigate this thing. It's never really necessarily openly discussed. There's very few what we might call rules that guide our relationships that are openly discussed. Maybe except monogamy. Like, okay, we're not going to see other people. We'll be monogamous. But like, how do we deal with conflict? We don't usually sit down and say, let's have an agreement on how we do this. With my couples, we sit down and we have an agreement on literally how we do conflict, and we cover as much detail as possible. And one of the teaching things that I'll use as an example is like, it's really important to get as detailed as possible, because, for instance, let's just say there's an agreement that, in your mind, if it gets too loud or too excited, or I get too worked up, or she gets too worked up, or whatever it is, and I leave the room because I'm thinking this is the best thing for the relationship, right? If you haven't talked through that, the other person might have abandonment issues, and they see you walking out as not trying to save your relationship, but you're the fuck out. They're like, oh, so you're like triggering the worst wounds possible. So like, that's why these agreements are so important. So at least cognitively, you still might get triggered, and most likely you will. And we'll talk about that in the second and third piece. But like, at least you have cognitive verbal agreements on this is how we're going to do a conflict. And it might include like, hey, if it gets too messy for either one of us, yeah, let's separate out for a little bit. I'll go to a different room and I'll do number 1 or number 2, or we can do number 3 together. But at least there's an agreement. Now, agreements are great. They sound wonderful. But if the inner work is not done and the couple work is not done that supports the agreement, then, in a week from now or 3 weeks from now, they're going to come back and say, he's a liar. He said he was going to do this, and he did the opposite of this, or she's this. And because they're not, once you're triggered, it's hard to live into the agreement. Yeah. But at least we have the basis of the agreement. And then the individuals have to do their healing work, start working on whatever the triggers might be that makes it difficult to live into the agreement. They have to do the self-regulatory work. So even if they are triggered, they can regulate themselves in the moment as best as possible and live into the agreement. And then the evolutionary work, just to involve their consciousness and stuff. So all of that's important. And a piece of that is heart math. Heart math, they have devices, which I always have all my couples use. First, as individuals, they can learn to get into coherent state and be calm, cool, and centered, activate the prefrontal cortex, live through their agreements as best as possible. So it's like a daily practice that I have them do. And even a practice I might have them do during a conflict. Like, hey, I'm going to step out of this room. I'm going to go do the heart math. I'm going to get myself calm, cool, and centered. And then we're going to come back. I'm going to come back in. Cool. I'll stop there, because then there's the co-regulation with the couple stuff that can be done too. No, so if you have any questions.
No, it explains a lot. And I like the idea of, like you say, the agreement and the contracting up front, so that we all know. It's not, we can't write all the rules, but we can set some of the frameworks and the boundaries of where we want to play this thing. Like you say, we've got to do the work. We both got to come at this from a place. And did you say the idea was heart math? Is that
that's one of the tools? Yeah, that's one of the tools I have my couples use to learn how to regulate their nervous systems and get into coherence and operate from the heart, really. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, and I'll now overlaying my entire life onto this. Just
That's
so,
awesome.
It takes a moment for me to kind of come up with the next question, and you'll understand why. But this is super useful. And again, I've had so many conversations with people who get into this situation, and like I say, they'll walk out, or they'll they'll do something just to calm down themselves, but the other person hasn't agreed to that, and then there's a reaction. So why did you do that? And there is cultural stuff. There is definitely cultural stuff, and that my wife is from Czech Republic, and so there's things I've learned over time that she does something, or she gives away, or she says something a particular way, which is just cultural. It's just a non-translation, a lost in translation time moment. Really interesting. So once we've done the work, how do we then come back together? What does that allow?
Let me actually, because you made an excellent point on different cultures, but I also want to like take that point and nail it to different ways of seeing the world for both the couple, like the husband and the wife. Yeah, cultures create all kinds of really interesting dynamics and confusions. And I actually have a couple he's an American, she's, I believe, Romanian. So like very similar, I think, to the worldview that maybe your wife has in terms of what husbands are supposed to do and what wives are supposed to do, and different than the American version of the same. So there's interesting cultural dynamics. But even any two individuals, doesn't have to be a married couple, you can think of like two different reality tunnels. Like there's so many different forces that created how they perceive the world. And part of this whole work I do with couples, and to make them even more resilient, is playfulness and curiosity, like are two important words. Curiosity, it's so important for you to continue, not only at the very beginning, because like you're dating them, you want to know who they are, but like throughout the whole time that you guys are together, however long that is, to continue to be curious about them. Because we can get into these habits like, I know what they're thinking, I know what they need, I'm going to mind read, or he should know what I'm thinking, or she should know what I'm thinking, all that stuff like that. And hopefully we're growing, learning, changing all the time, which is true. I don't say hopefully, we always are. And like, if you approach your partner with kind of the awe, like, oh my God, this is a human being who loves me and wants to spend the rest of their life with me. This is so awesome. In your case, we have a child. This is wow. And I wanted to get to know them every day as a new human being, because literally they wake up as a new human being. Literally, was it every 7 weeks? I'm trying to remember the whole cellular turnover. Literally, they are a whole new human being, not just psychologically, spiritually, but like physically. But so if you can approach it with that curiosity, because you're literally talking to an alien, like who grew up completely different than you, like yeah, and it can be fun. And then I'll talk about the playfulness in a little bit too.
So what does the end result of that look like? So we come to some form of agreement and we move on and we just face the next hurdle, or is there some way of kind of wrapping it up and concluding episodes that allow you to kind of say, okay, well, we've crossed this bridge, let's move on to a bigger, better challenge?
Okay, ask that question again, if you don't mind.
So yeah, because again, I think we find these situations, we tackle them, we kind of get through them, whether it's pretty or whether it's muddy or anything like that. How do we kind of, I guess, debrief? I get, if I think about a corporate project or something, we get to the end, okay, well, let's look back at that and how did we do, and rate yourself out of 5 and all those kind of things. How do we give ourselves a score, or
I love that. Okay.
Put a bow on it.
Okay. After action report. Okay, got it.
There you go.
Cool. Yeah. So, and this is where the curiosity, I'll say the playfulness, and the need for both people to be as open as possible. And this is where the inner work comes in. It's so important that everyone's on their own growth path, because both people need to be open to the fact that they have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. They have their blind spots and they have their vision, And if you can be in a relationship where you're open enough that your partner, in a loving, caring way, I mean, if they're a jackass about it, that changes the dynamic. But if they can point out to you how you might not have shown up as fully as you wanted to, because they know what your standards are, or they know one of your insecurities, and they're not beating you with it like a bat with your insecurities, but they just, they acknowledge it and they want to, talk to you about it because it showed up in the conflict or one of your fears or whatever. So like that is I would say it's a really beautiful place to be in, if you can be in the type of relationship where after the fact you work through the conflict, that you can actually go back and start asking those questions. It could just be questions before statements. Like, what did you learn about yourself or me or us in this conflict? That's a pretty open-ended conversation that could lead to some amazing things. And maybe you have some insights that you want to share. I had an intuitive hit. I don't know if this is correct. Is this accurate for you? Or I noticed this. What do you make of this in terms of your behavior? So you're not telling them exactly what their intent was behind the behavior. You just notice the behavior. Or you can say, sure, you can start with your own self. Like, when we're having this conflict, I noticed that these things are going on inside my mind, and like, I just want to share with you the crazy thoughts that I was having, which led me to start taking our agreement and tearing it apart and heading down a different path until I realized what was going on. And I can share, like, this is what I was seeing and this is what I was feeling. Cool. And then your partner hopefully would be open enough to say, wow, I can see why you did what you did, because that's what your thinking went. And I'll give you an example. I co-led a couples retreat, and we had the couples, and this is a brilliant exercise. I didn't come up with it. My partner for the retreat did. She had them switch sides. So like the man became the husband became the wife, the wife became the husband. They got to play each other out, like role playing. And yeah, so not only was it funny as hell, really funny because they're laughing and stuff like that, but what generated from it was empathy. The husband got to see the wife got to see the husband as reflections, like this, like a new way of seeing themselves in the other person. And it was fun and funny and playful, but it literally opened up a whole new empathetic dialogue between them, because they're like, oh my God, I now know something about you in a different way. I don't take it personally. Like, you're not attacking me. Like, I see where this is coming from. I just happen to be the focus of your attack, or whatever it happened to be. So it increases empathy. So this kind of after action report can also increase empathy, which I think is really important. Show you some areas you might need to cultivate better skills and capacities inside oneself and between the couples. And like, cool, like we did this. 2 is 1. Like, we're heading in the right direction. And now we've successfully completed this. We can move on. Not that there's succeeding ones that, like, life happens. You never know what the next one's going to be. It could be like really small, but we know we can do these things. Then we can do the after action report. We can learn and grow from it, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and then just high five each other. And like you say, the next challenge is coming around the corner. You don't know what, you don't know when.
Yeah, you don't know.
But you kind of reconsolidate that 2 is 1, and we're going ahead. Let's scale it up then. So far we've talked about resilience as an individual. We've talked about one-to-one resilience, where we're in, say, a kind of a dynamic couple. How do we scale up to an organization? And is that still the individual results? Is it a one-to-one thing, or is there a cultural aspect that we need to bring into companies to have resilience?
Definitely a cultural thing. And I'm going to go on a route through Navy special warfare. I'm not a SEAL, but I did a lot of training with SEALs, and I worked for Commander Mark Devine at SEAL Fit. And I was fortunate. I was 39. I wasn't 22, but I was fortunate to do something called the 3-week SOF Academy, which was an academy, a pre-buds training program for young men who want to go Navy special warfare. Literally, all the guys I trained with are now SEALs. So it's a really good program. Lived on campus with them for it was almost a month, and we trained 12, 14 hours a day. It was amazing. And you completed it with what's called Kokro Camp. It's it modeled after Hell Week, but for civilians, it's 50 hours instead of 5 days. No sleep. You just train from one environment to the other. But you're put in boat crews through the whole thing. You're part of a team. And it was brilliant to watch. And I'm kind of answering your questions sideways. It's brilliant to watch. And I ended up working for Mark for about a decade after I did all these things, running some of his programs, launching some of his programs with him. But being a participant in it, I got to see the SEAL cadre who would come in and do the Kokro camp, for instance. See the one guy who's so egoic. I'm a tough guy. I've got this. And they would fucking kick his ass until the moment he is like, realizes, oh, I'm part of a team. I got to get my eyes off myself onto another person. And then they would let go, because like he learned the lesson. It's different. Like from what I understand from RU Delta, it's very agenic, but SEALs is very team. It's a team-oriented thing, so it kind of fits more with your question in terms of team stuff. And then I would see other people who were like they weren't doing very well. They weren't doing. They're like, am I really going to make it? The unconfidence, the voice in their heads was showing up. Their body was hurting. Their emotional resilience was contracting. Like, oh, I don't know. And then you could just see the teammates, circling them and supporting them and helping them cross the finish line. Not always. Sometimes people ring the bell and drop out. That happens in life. But the lessons were like, the overly egoic guy is not good for the team. And nothing wrong with the ego. Like, it's important to think well of yourself. But if you're part of a team, you got to be part of the team. And you got to look for the person, you might call it the weakest link, but the person who's having a real hard time. So like the team can be a really powerful tool to help bring in the overly egoic guy into the fold. And we're not going after his individuality. We're not going after him as a person. We're just tempering his overly inflated self-sense of sorts. And then the person who might lack the confidence for whatever reason, life hit them really hard, you can help bring them into the fold and support them. And the overall lesson for me was, and you already said this well, it's like resilience, yes, it is inside of me. It's physical, it's mental, emotional, and spiritual, but it's interpersonal. I can't do this alone. Like we come from women. We literally are birthed from another human being. We spend 9 months incubating inside another person. Yeah, I think the metaphor that we're an island is not true. Unless it's a chain of islands and all interconnected. It's more like we're a tree and the branches, not the branches, the roots all interconnect. That's maybe a better metaphor for us. So it's important to start thinking of ourselves, in that way. And those are some of the lessons, for instance, I learned when I was doing the SEAL Fit stuff with the Commander Divine. I'll stop there because I want to go with that.
One of the things that I think, I've done a little bit of reading on SEALs, on special forces, and on kind of high-performing teams like this, is the ability to recognize strengths. So it's managing ego, but also appreciating your strengths, and also recognizing weaknesses and being prepared to say, "Hey, I need a hand," and accepting that sometimes you're driving, sometimes you need support, and kind of going through that. Yeah. How in corporate space, because I know you do work with companies and organizations and stuff, this admission of weakness is still not very well received. If I say, actually, I'm not doing very well, and you go to your manager and say, I'm struggling with this, it's like, do you need to find another job or something along those lines? And I see good managers able to have conversations like this where they can be more supportive, and I see very traditional spaces where that conversation won't even arise, and then that leads to all of the somatic problems and like restraint and that kind of thing. Where are some of the areas of advice you kind of lean into if people are thinking about how do we make corporate teams more resilient? Is there anything that you specifically recommend?
Yeah, so I think lead by example is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing. You need to have the leadership show the way forward. I work with JC, like I mentioned, he's a former Army Ranger, and he runs the Commit Foundation, which is a foundation that helps veterans transition from the military to civilian life. And we talk a lot, and and he's literally in the leadership space, and in the military is in the leadership space, and he used to do a lot of consulting for various companies too. And so we kind of talk about these things. And in what I learned amazingly well from him is that just by example, I watch him, but also what he teaches too, is that if the leaders don't eat their own dog food, is what we say at SEALFIT, eat their own dog food and show up how they want their employees to show up, that lack of alignment, the lack of integrity will fissure in the organization or the company. So if the leader wants there to be a more human space, like we recognize that we're humans, we have a lot of challenges mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and not that you want the workspace of your place you process your whole life, but you have to recognize that people bring in their life into their workspace. And if you can adjust accordingly, you still have your mission, still be frontside focused, have an offensive mindset, get the job done. All that's really important. But treat your employees like human beings, whatever that might mean for you. And not that you have to be their therapist or their coach, but yeah, maybe there's a place to bring in a coach. Maybe there are some things that you're noticing in terms of either individuals that might need help to develop certain capacities or certain skills that they might need, as an example. How do you shift the culture to support the things that you and I are talking about? So you might need to bring in experts. Like I know I have a friend, Brent, who's a former DevGuru guy. He literally goes into corporations. He wrote an amazing book, which you might be interested in, called Embrace the Suck. And he literally goes into corporations and teaches them how to take some of the concepts from Navy Special Warfare into that space. Like, how do you create a culture that's optimized, that's frontside focused, that's going to take on the day, but also recognizes that these people aren't fucking robots. Like, you have to treat them as human beings. And I'd say pieces of this too, because I always think like systemically. You want to have them as physically capable as possible. Okay. What kind of food do you feed them? It's just, what are the inputs? Like, that's, I think, and not that you can do whatever you want, free country for the most part, almost, but like, hey, do whatever you want. But if you want your people to be optimized and do the best they can, what's the inputs? What's the structure, the environment look like? What's the food, the hydration? Do they have access to clean air? Are they enclosed in this building all day long? When I work with clients, like I will encourage them if they can, it's appropriate to take their clients, if they have work with clients, great, sit behind your desk, have the client come in and sit, and I don't mean it therapeutically in the business space, but if you can take them out for a walk, we know that walking has multiple different health benefits, but also has a creativity benefit. And what the feedback I've gotten for just this one example of like, hey, let's go for a walk, someone in the chain that you need to talk to, whether it's another company that's coming in that you're working with or someone within your employment, one of your employees, if you go for the walk, there's a psychological freedom that occurs. There's more of an openness that occurs. Obviously, this is not like 0 degrees outside or 120 degrees like sometimes here in Texas, but like, weather conducive.
We're now
to good
negotiating and I'm oppressing you with the heat sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But so, I would encourage the leadership not only to show up and eat their own dog food as fully as they want their other people to show up, but like think about the environment. Is it conducive to the type of work that you want your people to do? Or if you do feed them, you don't always feed them, but is it healthy food?
Yeah.
All those questions I think are useful to start thinking about and asking.
I'm a long-standing teacher trainer, so the classroom or the how we call it, conference room is a comfortable space for me. And there's a reason training takes place in that conference room, right? It's because it changes your frame of mind. You go there and you're like, oh, I'm in an education space, and immediately something switches in the brain. I also remember from back in the day teaching a certain course. We'll mention no names just to protect the innocent. But every day there would be bowls of candy and chocolate on the table and Red Bull in the fridge and stuff like that. And we couldn't keep attention for more than 5 minutes. It's like, okay, well, it's okay for going out and doing high velocity sales, but it's not conducive to a learning environment and things along those lines. And the walking one is such a great idea. It's I have if I'm at my desk, I behave a certain way. If I'm in a classroom, I behave a certain way. If I'm here, how do I behave when I'm walking? It's like, I don't know. I have to say whatever I'm feeling, I guess. And I've had one-to-ones like that, and it changes.
And are they good? Yeah, they really do. And actually, if you wouldn't mind me just speaking of the education side of the conference room, I've taught different in different programs in different locations, and I remember someone raised their hand in the back of the room, and I'm like, yeah. She's like, hey, I think it was a he actually. He's like, I have a back issue. Do you mind if I stand up and stretch a little bit? And I thought that was real. Of course, I said, yeah. Like, I don't want you to be uncomfortable. But I thought how interesting it is that our education system is reflective of elementary school and high school. Like, you sit in rows, you pay attention, you get your Ritalin, so or your Red Bull, like whatever the drug of choice, the candy, whatever it is, like, so at least you can pay attention for a few minutes. But you don't have the freedom as a sovereign adult to do what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Yeah,
you actually have to ask permission just to stand up because your back hurts. No judgment on this person. That's just the way we structure the whole education system, which now shows up in the corporate space. But like, wow, like how do our various systems keep us unsovereign to a certain extent?
Yeah,
fascinating. And what would it be like if you actually had more sovereign people in the corporate space? Would they be more productive? I would think so. Because they'd definitely be happier, healthier.
Yeah, it's funny as a trainer when somebody does something out of the ordinary. Like I remember back in the day, like why do you want to do that? And why are you changing? And like, how does that reflect me? And what have I done? I'd like take a person. It's like, no, it's you. You do you. Like, and you know how to learn. You're a grown up and all these kind of things. Definitely different in the kids space. This is opening my eyes. I'm sure the listeners are having their eyes open and like, oh my goodness, like there's those adult moments where you have those realizations of all the things we've done historically that we could have done differently, and there's also aha moments that we're going to be able to take moving forwards. Now, you teach this, you've studied this, you have applied this. One of the things I find is the more expert we become, the more we realize that there is to learn. How does Michael D. Ostrolenk still have to remind himself about being resilient? Where does resilience challenge you, and how do you show up? I guess in resilience 3.0, which is where the master goes.
Wow, that's I love that. I love it. So actually, right before this call, this is intellectual resilience. So I every year, but I'm modifying it this year because we're halfway through this year. But I do what I call personal PhD. So the last week of December, I put together my whole education program for the new year. It's all the different areas I want to study, and then how I'm going to study them: audio books, or written books, or classes online and in person, structured. And I literally spent this morning doing that, because the more I know, the less I know. I'm like, oh my God, there's, and science is, because I'm in the space, I'm like, science is always showing us new things about how the brain works, or the gut microbiome, or food effects on our psychology, or every other thing that's going on. I'm like, whoa. So I'm always creating opportunities for me to learn new things. And I'll give you another example of this. My doctor, he's an amazing integrated medicine doctor. I'm going to start shadowing him, because I love the way he thinks. And I'm not going to become a doctor, but just his systemic thinking is going to really help me inform more fully my systemic thinking when it comes to coaching, or therapeutic coaching I do. So like, I want to understand his model. So I asked him yesterday when I was seeing him, like, hey, can I shadow you? And he's like, yeah. So I'm going to sit with him on some of his client work, with permission, obviously, from the clients. So I can like absorb his approach, as one example. So I hope to be always on the cutting edge of learning new things, a lifelong learner. And then I have a team. So I have a programmer, Will Ravello. He's former Army Special Forces. He's former SWAT commander in San Francisco Bay Area. And he physically programs me for training. And he doesn't play games. Like, I did a 50-mile go ruck for a team food edition I put together. We did it in May. He trained me up for the 50-mile go ruck. Like, he's an amazing trainer. So like, always being pushed in that direction. Great dude. And then I have literally a full medical team behind me. Like, I have precision-based medical doctors, or integrated medicine doctors. I have nutritionists, Chinese medicine practitioners, Ayurvedic practitioners, intuitive healers, and like a little bit of everything that I can think of that I want to kind of create a holistic model of what's possible for me physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I put together a team, and I work with them quite regularly. Blood work every 3 to 6 months. I modify my diet accordingly, according to seasons, and according to my training regime, and all that stuff. And then baseline, like, here's my DEXA scan. Dude, you're fat. Okay, cut your I'm not really fat, but like, okay, I think I'm 12% body fat. I want to get down to 10% body fat. Okay, so like baseline, and as many areas as possible. Work with these amazing healers, or coaches, or therapists, and then test myself regularly over time to see if I'm improving in any and all these directions. And that keeps me continually working towards more resilience, more optimization. Yeah.
Do you experience that? Do you experience that feeling, like you say, of being held back? Like, does that ever come in?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I'm in Austin, Texas, but I'm nomadic, and I've been nomadic for about 1.5 years, and I'll answer your question in a funny way. So I traveled around the country. Also, I spent a month in Ecuador, and all my friends I've been staying with are coaches, therapists, or healers of some types. And they're so good at pinpointing any and everything I do. They're watching everything I do. Like, I might say the wrong word. I might say something like, I want to go do this. Oh, you want to? Oh, that's really nice and passive. How about you will go do this? Or maybe you really don't want to do that. I'm like, oh shit. Like, so I'm like, I love them 99% of the time. 1% of the time, like, you guys are fucking assholes. But being around people who are on the growth path constantly help me see my own limitations, my own poor thinking, my own poor use of language, my own contractions. And then I have spiritual practices that I do to also kind of be more self-aware inside myself as well.
Okay. So even the best of us still have these moments where we stray off the path. It's good to know. It is a practice, right? It is a practice. And, I'm disciplined. I train, my journey is in bodybuilding and competing in that. And,
nice.
Do I want to go to the gym every day? No. Do I want to eat grilled chicken and lentils? And do I want to weigh food? No. Do I want a burger? Yes. And it's like, it's application of the ideas. It's not just the ideas. Like the knowledge is great, wisdom is application. Right? So
Right on.
What if people are listening and thinking, okay, I could do with being a bit more resilient. I could do with this. Where do they start? You've mentioned tons of things in here. What are, say, 2 or 3 practical things I can do today that are going to help make me more resilient?
Well, I think you just nailed it. And I'll start the physical side of things. You need to have a physical practice. I prefer an integrated practice, but let's just stick with the physical practice for now. Like whatever that thing is for you, whether it's bike riding or running or lifting weights or playing soccer, barre, kung fu, taekwondo, whatever the thing is, find your passion and stick to it. And it doesn't mean you have to be like 7 days a week, 5 hours a day. Like unless you're bodybuilding, you're training up for a program, or you're doing a Tough Mudder or Spartan Race GoPro camp. Like, just enjoy it. You're not necessarily going towards a goal. I mean, a goal of health and wellness, but not like I want to compete and win this thing. So find that discipline and stick to it. And what I always recommend people do is, because you want to be internally motivated, but you can also get help from your friends and family. Let them know, like, this, if it truly is. And I always work with clients, like, is this truly a priority for you? Because they say it and they look at their life and like, you say you want to be eating healthy, and then you're like eating McDonald's every couple of days. And we should have a conversation, because maybe that's really not a priority for you, or maybe we need to realign your behaviors on a daily basis. So make sure it's really what you really want to do. Tell your friends, tell your family. If you're married, tell your spouse so she can nag you or he can nag you. However you want them to show up to support you, to make sure you're following through on your disciplines, as as like the on your shoulder, the devil on your shoulder, or maybe the angel on your shoulder, however you want them to show up. But physically do that. And I would say part of the physical stuff too, in my program, I go, what's your diet and nutrition? Find your diet, not a diet like I'm going to do this for a month and then stop. I mean, that's fine if you have a health condition, work with a practitioner to make sure you're healing properly or using the diet program properly. Like, what is your overall approach to eating food, both for fueling and nutrition and nourishment and pleasure? Like, sit with all that and figure that out, and be disciplined with that, because you are literally nourishing your physical body. It's like, it sounds like, of course you are, but like, if you really sat and thought about like all the stuff you put inside yourself and the effects it has on your physical system, forget psychological, just the physical system. If you really sat with that, you're like, wow. That's why, for instance, I encourage people to do the Whole30 as one example. You do the Whole30 and you can realize, like, oh my God, I've been feeling like crap, but I didn't know that. You do the Whole30, like, wow, like, oh my God, these various foods like really disrupt my system, at least for now. Maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, they won't, but they do for now. And you get a new baseline. Like, I feel really good. Yeah, cool. And then you can reintroduce things and see what works for you. But like, be mindful of your food and then discipline with whatever you choose to do within that framework. And I always encourage people to get blood work. Yeah. Like, you could guess what you think is good for you. And like, literally something that great for you might not really work well for me, because either my genetics and how I process certain things, or my microbiome is different, obviously different than yours, or whatever. There's various variables that we need to modify. But like, get blood work, figure out your diet, be disciplined around that. And I'll stop there. And sleep. Yeah. Oh my God, that'd be like the first thing I should say. Go watch any videos for Dr. Kirk Parsley on sleep. Dial in your sleep. That's like the most important thing you could ever do in your whole life. Dial in your sleep.
So let me jump on that, because the nutrition piece is really interesting. For bodybuilders, I mentioned, like, the week before competition, we go through something called peak week, which for about 4 or 5 days, you are carb depleting. Think of like a marathon runner, but for muscles and size. And so you go through the same idea, which is this hypercompensation at the end, where you add the carbs back in, body holds onto it, you look a little bit bigger because it holds all the water. But in that phase, and just before, you've gone through 8, 12, 16-week depletion, low carb, you're in catabolic state, not for muscles, but you're losing weight, you're in a caloric deficit, and you're getting progressively more and more tired over this period. You look great on stage, but you're exhausted in reality. And whenever I talk to bodybuilders, this is where self-doubt kicks in. This is where emotions go all over the place. This is where, the temper comes so short, and all of these aspects. And this is just through diet. This is purely through diet. And so if you want to be resilient, which is showing up consistently and being able to manage that internal state, there's no freaking way you can do that when your biology is going all over the place and like having a little happy party inside your body. There's no way, right? It's just not going to happen. So it sounds basic and sounds obvious, but it is so important. And like you say, the blood work, I've actually not had mine done, but you know, I've done experiments historically where I've kind of looked into those things, and I've had my bloods taken probably a couple of years ago from a normality perspective. You know, you get to that age, right, and people start taking blood and checking if you're okay.
Little grays on my, I hear you.
But it's so important, right? And especially, you know, I'm in a natural category, so I don't use chemicals or anything to artificially inflate, deflate. But I know when you do, it's such a big impact on the body that we've got to keep an eye on that. So you're surrounded by all of those people, but again, we can access that even if you don't have a massive clinic behind you. You can access that in kind of mail order options as well for people listening.
You know, and what strikes me, and I want to add this in, a key piece of resilience is knowing what your why is. Because if you know what your why is, even whatever's going on inside your system, even if it's haywacking and crazy and you're feeling like crap, you can still be front side focused on your why. It can be the driving force, and a lot of people don't have whys. You know, and you obviously because you're competing in a bodybuilding competition. Your why is like, I assume you want to win the competition, right? Yeah, so that can drive you. That's why you go to the gym every day and eat lentils and chicken, as you said.
Whatever I choose to buy that's healthy or I think is healthy in that moment. It's not fun. But that's funny, and you mentioned this is your goal is like your 12%, you want to get below 10%. Like, my question would be why? Because I had that get below 10% goal for so long. I wrote it down every year and I never got anywhere near to it because there was nothing pushing me beyond it. It was just like, oh, that would be nice to have. And it's like, actually, there's now a bigger calling, and it's attached to something. It's not just the bodybuilding, but it's the vehicle that allows me to tell stories. And that's what I remember. That's what tells me to, Dan, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, go and put the kettle on, wake up, and then go and tell some more stories. This is what people are looking for. So, Michael, this has been a phenomenal exploration of the world of resilience. I love the stories you bring to it. I love the kind of ways you brought other technologies and concepts into it and made it highly applicable. So thank you for sharing knowledge and wisdom with us today. And like I said, wisdom is the application of knowledge. So hopefully people who are listening to this are going to go and do something with it. If they want to find out more, how can they find out about more and about you and the resilience work that you do?
Yeah, so Michael D. Ostrolenk, OSTROLENK.com. Information about my work with individuals, my work with couples. If you're interested in the resilience group that JC Glick and I run, it's resilienceoptimized.com. M. Ostrolenk on Twitter and Instagram. I spend way too much time on Instagram. And then you can find me on my full name on Facebook and LinkedIn as well.
Phenomenal. So yeah, go and follow it and follow Michael. See resilience in action. That's what I'm going to say. So thanks again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to going and checking out your feeds now.